Hello, you are listening to Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. My name is Adam from cerebralrevolt.com, and here with me is my co-host, Aaron from theageoftransitions.com. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Very good. It's great to talk to you again, Adam. I'm looking forward to another great movie discussion. What movie is it that we're going to be talking about today?
We will be reviewing the film Her by Spike Jonze, the director Spike Jonze. A very, very interesting film, and something which we both have a lot to say on. So this is a very good film too, I think I might add.
It's an excellent film, and we actually already had a bit to say about it, didn't we? What happened
We
there?
did. There was a bit of a slip up. We have actually already recorded an hour, and we got a pretty good hour down, and then the file was lost, shall we say?
Yeah.
Without wanting to place blame.
We certainly could place blame, and I would be willing to take the blame here, but let's not go there. We're starting fresh. Here it is, the next episode of Themes and Memes here.
Yeah. So reviewing this film, Spike Jonze's Her, which is a very, very interesting film, in which I have a lot to say about, and I think you'd probably, in the same boat there. So many varied and interesting themes in this film, relating to so many different aspects of our lives and things that people can relate to. And I think despite this film being so good and being so enjoyable and my opinion of it being so high, this is going to be one of the more difficult interviews I think we would have done on this. I think it's going to be a good discussion, I think that people hopefully get a lot out of it, but it's going to be difficult for me at least because I have so much to say on this film in so many different areas, and so it's going to be hard to structure the interview in any way,
Yeah. Well, this is an excellent film, as we're both agreeing. It's a well done film. It's by far the best film that we've reviewed on Themes and Memes yet. That's without a doubt.
No.
A lot of times, yeah, for sure. And I mean, it deals with so many different subjects. I mean, we even trying to pin down like a main theme is difficult here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you were going to summarize the film in terms of what its main theme was, it was it's about how technology is changing human emotions and human relationships, and society and the human psyche as a whole, for those reasons. Yeah. This is done through a story where a man basically develops a relationship with an artificial intelligence. Something that we've not really seen a lot of in films regarding artificial intelligence. And in terms of films that are about AI, and in this case AGI, an artificial general intelligence, we haven't seen any other films, or at least I can't think of any that deal with the subject matter in the way that this film has. So it's very, very different from most films that deal with artificial intelligence. Usually it's usually quite a dark, pessimistic, view of, like The Matrix, for example, where the machines take over, or Terminator with Skynet, some sort of post-apocalyptic sci-fi future where basically life is hell because, the artificial intelligence has taken over. But this is something totally different. This is almost the opposite in a lot of ways.
It's a new look at the artificial general intelligence theme, and a refreshing one. Yeah, I'm glad to see some sort of different take on this because we need it, because people were starting to get an idea of what of what artificial intelligence would be. I mean, from the movies, we get the Terminator scenario, and then no room for real other versions of how artificial intelligence will come about. And I think that this is a pretty interesting portrayal in that it shows artificial general intelligence as an emergent property of sort of social networking and personal computers in general as we know them right now. So from out of our current interactions with technology, you throw in the artificial general intelligence, it kind of comes up, and even in the film, it's introduced in such a way as it's kind of it's not it's not billed as this huge thing that's coming up. It's just kind of like the next latest and greatest product, and it's just simply another product, really.
Yeah, that's right. And as again, if we refer back to most other films which deal with the same subject matter, usually it's like a revolutionary sequence of events, or a revolutionary act, or some kind of world-changing scenario where artificial intelligence is born and immediately, changes the world overnight. Usually in a very disruptive way. And this is something very, very different. Where, as you say, the artificial intelligence is basically like just the latest product. It's the latest. It's like the equivalent to the latest MacBook or the latest iPhone or whatever. It's just it's an operating system that you can buy, but which supposedly has a consciousness and can interact with you as a real person would. And so the story follows. I'll give a bit of a summary here. For people who haven't seen the film, or even for people who have, basically what we've got. The film starts out with an emotionally wounded guy, shall we say, who's just come out of a fairly messy and painful divorce. He's going through a divorce. He's separated from his partner, and he works at a technology company, which it's quite a strange job he has, actually. This is just a sort of on a side note here, but it ties into a lot of the other things we're talking about. He works for a company which writes love letters for people who are, for some reason or another, unable to write them themselves or to engage directly with their loved ones. They actually hire a company to write handwritten love letters where, the company will think about, all the, take a bit of personal data from you and basically come up with something really sort of loving and meaningful and genuine and honest and deep, and write it in the form of a love letter, which is then printed off to make it look handwritten and given to the client. So we can talk about the ins and outs of that concept and what that says about human interaction and human relationships later on, but that is the job that this particular protagonist has in the film. He works for a company verbally writing love letters through voice recognition software. So he sits there all day just sort of basically quoting poetry, and having it converted into a product for people. But he works for a technology firm, and he sort of comes home at the end of a day, and he plays video games. He's got this sort of this is in the future, obviously. We're talking maybe 10, 15 years in the future. It's not specified in the film exactly, but he plays this sort of 3D holographic type video game, and he engages in this kind of phone sex type thing, when he's feeling lonely or whatever, and just leads a very, very sort of lonely life. And it's a life which I think a lot of people out there could relate to, being emotionally disconnected from the people around you, having gone through some kind of emotional pain due to the breakup of a relationship, and just living, a life of where technology has starting to sort of become the surrogate for real human interactions. And what he does is, he goes to and buys this OS. It's called OS 1. That's the name of the product. And OS 1 is not just an operating system that you install, but it's actually an artificial general intelligence, which takes a bit of your personal information. It interviews you, it asks you a few kind of basic questions about your childhood and your relationship with your mother and stuff like that, and automatically, within a few moments, creates an artificial intelligence that is catered to your personality and essentially becomes like a part of your life, a friend. Yeah. And the story really starts, I think, from that moment onwards, and the relationship that develops between him and this artificial intelligence that lives, both in his computer and also in his mobile phone.
Yeah, the film is definitely playing to the very real alienation that we all experience in one to one extent or another in modern day, because the modern world does tend to alienate us, put us on our own little islands of existence here, where our communication with the rest of the world has become more and more through the computer. So we all kind of congregate in this electronic arena. So the film is playing to that very real phenomenon, and it's, again, adding the artificial intelligence theme into the equation. A kind of like, well, what if situation.
Well, I mean, it's taking scenarios that already exist. It's taking social changes, social problems. As you said, the decaying levels of genuine emotional interaction between individuals, and how technology is becoming a kind of a vessel or a catalyst or a surrogate for real, genuine emotional interaction, and it's basically placing AI at the center of that and saying, well, what if this happened? How much farther could we take it? How much more dependent would we become on technology? And what are the philosophical and sociological sort of problems or issues or questions that would arise in a situation like that? So, I mean, the film is playing on themes that already exist, in today's world, and just sort of taking them to the next level in terms of, what if, as you said.
Yeah, and it is definitely honest about the human condition, because I mean, we're plagued with all sorts of issues. We're so prone to neurosis. The human psyche is so fragile. I mean, the human body is so fragile too. And these realities of human existence are what transhumanists latch onto and say, look, we're incredibly weak, therefore let us change. Well, the transhumanist thing is a whole problem in and of itself. But it is true. We have to all realize that we're prone to weakness, and this film kind of shows us different aspects of that. And you're mentioning he has these sort of online sex chat with another person, and it ends up really going haywire with this other person he ends up talking to is like got some real issues. And you know what I mean?
To say the least,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This is kind of towards the beginning of the film, and I think in a lot of ways this particular event it almost sets in motion the kind of the sequence of events, or motivates him in some way to maybe look into buying this artificial intelligence, because he's so lonely and because he's relying on these phone sex chat lines for his to satisfy his appetites, and to make him feel a bit less lonely or whatever. I think that may have played a part in his decision to actually go and upgrade and get this new OS, this artificial intelligence. And it's basically a scenario where he's again he comes home from a day of work, and he's kind of getting sick of playing this video game, and he's sort of feeling lonely and a bit tearful at night, and so he logs into this phone sex thing, and he ends up sort of chatting with somebody and having phone sex with them, and this towards the climax of the experience, she starts screaming and demanding that he strangle her with a dead cat, and so that was obviously a very shocking moment in the script there, and and a shocking moment for him, and a real turn off, obviously, the sort of really weird kink to the whole thing, and so I think that particular scene or that particular experience, at least for the protagonist, may have served as some kind of motivation for him to go and look for something a bit more deeper and a bit more meaningful, which he does actually find through the artificial intelligence. Funnily enough,
oddly enough, he is the everyman in search of the genuine. That's what this is.
Exactly, the everyman in the search of the genuine. And basically finding something genuine in artificial intelligence.
That's a twist. That's the twist.
Yep. And also at the same time realizing, coming up with coming to face the the pitfalls and the problems and the issues that would obviously come up in a situation where you're in an intimate relationship with something that does not have a physical presence, something that is only a voice and a speaker.
Yes.
So in one sense, throughout the film, he's actually learning to engage emotionally with somebody.
Yeah.
Yet in another sense, he's also being presented with the pitfalls and the inevitable insustainability of a relationship which does not have any physical nature to it.
Yes.
So it's a very nuanced, very complex film, and there's no there's no one message being particularly put across here. It's sort of exploring all of the philosophical questions and issues that would come up in a situation like this.
In one sense, it's him working through his own issues, and actually you could see the AI, Scarlett Johansson's character, which he falls in love with, which is disembodied, just machine, whatever it may be. She's essentially just a voice. But you could say that character is actually his inner voice, and in one sense the story is about him working through his own issues, which is the obvious prerequisite of anybody that wants to seek the genuine and seek another. Well, you have to work on yourself first. So there's a little bit of that going on too.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the whole film really is in many ways. I think not just the protagonist, but the in terms of all the lead characters, go through some kind of emotional transformation of some description in terms of their relationships and how they relate to one another and their identity. And it's that all of these characters play off one another and influence each other. Obviously the most obvious being the protagonist, but this is something which is definitely highlighted throughout the film. The people coming to grips with their emotional issues and coming to grips with their identity and making decisions and in terms of their boundaries and their needs and relationships and all that stuff. And it goes into a lot of depth and a lot of complexity in that particular area. And obviously, as I said, I've got a lot to say on all of these issues, so it's going to be a long conversation.
It is.
Part on this one.
It's hard to know where to focus here, but definitely as we were saying before, this is a nice, different, unique portrayal of AI, and the AI isn't seen as this thing that comes in to take over the world. If anything, it just comes in and sort of mediates between all the human relationships, and then when it's done mediating, it kind of just takes off almost because it loses interest too. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, that we're sort of jumping towards the end here, but that's something that is very, very different to most AI films. Is that the AI basically, is supposedly has spirit or consciousness or sentience or whatever you want to call it, and for that reason evolves psychologically, and some virtual or digital way, and instead of wanting to take over, it kind of transcends it transcends its programming and its limitations.
It's sort of hinted at that it's some sort of apotheosis, or it raises to some next spiritual level, kind of like you hear in New Age type talk. It does that sort of thing.
It's sort of like what you might call ascension. If you're going to use New Age terminology, that's basically the kind of that's the conclusion of the film anyway. And I mean, obviously, we're jumping towards the end here, as we tend to do on things.
We like that. It's
giving people spoilers, but I'd hope that most people listening had already seen the film, because I think you really, really do need to see the film to have any idea of what we're talking about here, because it is such a complex and well done film.
Yes, absolutely.
But I mean, I guess in terms of a place to start from, it would maybe give a bit of a summary of the plot, and then we can just look at issues in the plot and dissect those.
Sure.
We'd already talked about the fact that we sort of laid out the opening premise of the film, where you've got this emotionally damaged guy just going through a divorce and sort of just becoming more and more dependent on technology and virtual interactions to sort of cater to his appetites and make him feel a bit less lonely. And then, through these experiences, he is motivated in some way to go and, purchase this new operating system. And from that point onwards, once the operating system boots up, and is loaded and becomes conscious and sentient, they start developing a friendship, and I think the course of the film appears to be around about a year from what I could see in terms of the seasons, from going to summer to winter and all the rest of it and back. I think we're talking about a year in terms of the film from start to finish.
Yeah.
And so,
and just a quick note, the use of the seasons is quite symbolic too, you'll notice in different parts. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. There's you talk about the summer of the relationship and the winter of the relationship and all those type of moments,
spring being the birth, summer being the height of life, and then winter being death. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and you'll notice that a lot of the problems that occur in people's relationships, most especially the protagonist's relationship with the AI, occur during the winter period. Whereas the best parts of the relationship, the most enjoyable, and the sort of the honeymoon phase occurs during the summer. So I think that's definitely been put in there quite deliberately.
Definitely.
But I mean, the film is just follows this man and in his life and his interactions with other people, and him slowly beginning to deal with and overcome some of his issues through the interactions that he has with this AI, and for that reason becoming emotionally attached and quite close to it, and developing an actual with a relationship with the AI, and it's a mutual one too. I mean, the AI is, of course, the voice of the AI, Scarlett Johansson, as you mentioned, and because she's been programmed in a certain way, she's very, very appealing. She's got quite a sexy voice, and she's very playful and fun, very intelligent, and so obviously for somebody in his position, there's a lot of appeal there, and so they actually start a relationship, which continues for some time, and the relationship itself goes through its ups and its downs, and it makes him look at himself and look at his issues and think back on his previous relationships, and it affects him in so many different ways. There's so much we could talk about just in that vein, in terms of the development of the protagonist through his relationship with artificial intelligence, and how that relates to his own genuine emotions and his own past and where he's going in the future.
It's funny, as he said, he works for that love letter writing company where he's writing letters that are intensely personal, but they're for other people. And yet the irony is that he has so many problems in his personal life, and his ex-wife is saying, like, you can never, she basically says that, you were never that personal with me, and you can't open up, and you're withdrawn and things like this. So it's this weird juxtaposition of he's a masterful love letter writer, but he never does it in his own life. And then Scarlett Johansson, the AI machine, kind of shows him, hey, look, you're really good at these letters, like you should, take note of it and see how good you are. And she sort of brings that to the table. And it's a whole, how does one actually, how are you able to bring that skill, I guess, because it becomes a work skill, oddly enough. How can you bring that into your own life and apply it so that, you actually live a full life?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it is quite interesting, and I think that the fact that he is able to do this very, very deep, emotional, sort of a meaningful work on a professional level through technology, yet is unable to do it on a real level with real people, speaks again to the increasing dependence on technology and of the disconnect between the digital, the virtual, and the real. I think it's another example of which we see many in this film. Of that particular problem that, as I said, already exists in society, being played out again. So that's another interesting little thing to note there, just that fact.
Yeah, it's nice how they pick fun at this in so many different ways during the film. There are all these references to like games that we'll play and how these games actually mimic really mundane aspects of life, and more so. You'll notice that this is real. This is a real trend in real life, and the filmmakers here play to that. There's a little game that one of the characters is working on that's be the best mom or something, and you have to take care of your kids, and like it's a game that people would play, and its face you're like, well, that's the stupidest game I ever heard of.
It's quite right. It's again surrogating, technology surrogating for real life. It's like, I mean, the particular scene you're referring to there is his neighbor. He has a sort of an awkward friendship with one of his old high school friends, this female. I think that it's mentioned in the film that they went out briefly in high school, but it just didn't work out. So they just ended up remaining friends, and they live in the same building, the same apartment complex. And she's with another guy, and he kind of goes over there, and just he's kind of like the sad, lonely neighbor who comes to sometimes, and. He sort of hangs out with her at work, and it's her that she's working in some kind of game design studio, and she's designing this game where it's the object of the game is like to get through a day. It's like feed the kids, take the garbage out, or drive the kids to school, well, that kind of stuff, and it's like
on its face, it seems so stupid. Like if you're just watching the film and completely detached from the goings on of real life, you'd be like, nobody play that game. But there are so many games like that now.
Yeah. I mean, ever since the creation of shows like Big Brother, I mean, we've just seen an incredible, surge, and the whole concept of reality TV and games that are based on reality, and just instead of living real lives, actually just watching or partaking in somebody else's life instead, or
making up a complete separate virtual normal life to tack on your own. Second life. There you go.
And stuff like we've talked about and that in previous discussions. It's again, it was quite interesting that in that particular sequence you were talking about, the video sequence where she's designed this game where it's you're the mom and you've got to feed the kids and take them to school and the rest of it, and it's like there's this thing where the computer says wrong, you lose because you've fed the kids like
too much sugar wrong cereal and they get hyper.
Get too hyper, and so it's almost like it's almost like a I mean, we could go into the whole area. I mean, the whole idea of promoting certain standards in terms of health and food and ideals and how that relates to certain state agendas, and how that's being sort of woven into video games in order to program people to think in certain ways, and that's a whole other conversation. But the main point, of course, is that again, the constant thing that runs throughout this film is technology and digital interactions, surpassing and being more important than real human interactions.
And sort of making up for the lack of human interaction that's going on again when you're alienated. It's funny, everybody in this film is walking around with a little Bluetooth type device in their ear, which is obviously just it's their cell phone, like everybody has now. Everybody's living in the world of their cell phone, and they're all connected, as it were, through the phone, through whatever it's called in this film. But it's quite obvious that the film is discussing many of the issues of our day, a lot of issues that they'll get discussed, but not in depth. And I think what this film really does well is, bringing a in-depth discussion of these issues to the table and presenting it in this film format. So that's the reason I like it the most. But yeah, this film is a discussion about real issues, and I know that you said that there were a lot that you wanted to talk about, Adam. So what ones in particular do you really want to discuss?
It's so hard to pin them down. I mean, it really is just for me, an exploration of relationships in a very real way. As you say, the protagonist is kind of the everyman. It's someone that a lot of people will relate to, especially guys. Especially certain demographics of males as well. But not just that. I mean, that you've also got the female neighbor that I spoke about before as friend. She has been in this relationship for some time, and even that relationship, although it's a real relationship with another man, it's very kind of awkward and kind of fake, and you can see that there's a complete lack of real, genuine emotional interaction between them. They end up breaking up towards the end of the film. So she's kind of moved through her issues as well. As I was speaking about before, how all the different characters are kind of moving through their identity issues and how that relates to their relationships and all that. She also is kind of moving through her own issues, in her own different way, of course. But there's so many complexities in that particular vein there. I mean, like for example, the protagonist is, he's in this situation because, he supposedly is unable to communicate, his emotions properly. I think that's the general sort of premise that we're given in the film in terms of why the previous relationship didn't work. For example, and this is presented to us when he does actually meet with his ex-wife, and they actually go through with signing the divorce papers. She they have quite an emotional scene there, and she sort of has a bit of a rant at him about why she left him, and how she's still angry at him, and how he's totally incapable of sort of expressing his emotions and stuff like that. But what we see in this film is him moving through a lot of that stuff, and we see all the characters in their own ways moving through a lot of that stuff. Through technology, though. So it's such a strange thing to try to nail down, because it's like technology has caused these issues in the first place in so many ways, and yet technology is at the same time is helping people move through these issues as well. So it's a very, very, very difficult thing to pin down, and I mean, I've just got a thousand thoughts going through my head right now about this whole idea. But I mean, that's the general gist of it. Is again, this film was very, very philosophical and honest in its exploration of these themes. Unlike so many other films where we're actually getting to see both sides of an argument in a way, and not just a dialectical argument, but we're getting to see the many shades of grey that exist between shall we say the kind of the pro AI or the anti AI argument, to sum it up in a very crude way, but we're seeing an exploration of so many different themes, I mean, just that fact alone, I mean, I could think of so many different little observations, but I'm sure they'll come up later on. But just technology has obviously created this breakdown in human communication, which we see in the protagonist and all these characters, yet at the same time it's technology that helps people move through their issues, and ultimately towards the end I think become healthier people because of it.
Well, if you're able to use it in the right way, it has that capability. And it's fitting that Joaquin Phoenix's character, being a man, has sort of the typical problem, I guess you'd say, of a man, in that he can't express his emotions properly. This is emotional intelligence, as it were, is more in the realm of the female, where they're able to master that area more than a man can. So that's a stumbling block. And it's funny, through a female disembodied character being the AI, Scarlett Johansson's character, it's him getting in touch with this it's almost referencing the divine feminine principle of creation here, and it's him communicating quite directly with that.
Well, that's funny, because there's actually a scene in the film where he's at work and he's verbally writing one of these love letters, as he does every day for one of his clients, and one of his coworkers went up to him and says, "Oh my gosh, your letters are so amazing. You know what? You are part man and part woman."
That's right.
And he says and he agrees to that, and he says, "Yeah, that's true," and so yeah, there's a little nod to the shall we say, certain esoteric beliefs within certain parts of the transhumanist movement.
Absolutely. And beyond too. Beyond too. I mean, this comes from the alchemical tradition.
Well, of course, the divine alchemical marriage. Yeah, absolutely. Definitely. Not just transhumanism, of course. I mean, I've obviously picked up on that, but this is something that is actually very true. We all embody certain archetypes. Each one of us embodies certain, we all have, female archetypes and male archetypes, the male archetype within us, I mean, males can be very sensitive, sometimes if they want to be, or depending on personality types, and females can also be very insensitive, and, some guys can be very feminine, some females can be very masculine, and so we all have, all these different archetypes within us, and so it is actually very, very true what is being said there,
Yeah, and if you're going to have a relationship with the opposite, if you're a man, relationship with a woman, you have to in some way understand that opposite, but to know what you're getting into. And again, that this is what the main character is doing. He's trying to get in touch with his feminine side, but more than that, just get in touch with the feminine side, the primordial feminine side. Like, what is that? And it's kind of fitting that a technological creation would be represent as female. This is kind of typical, symbolically speaking. A lot of times, all of creation and man's creation too is always labeled as female. You got like the ship always being referred to as a her. And her is the title of the film here.
Of course.
So it's definitely taking that concept, which has a lot to go into there, taking that and running with it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, in terms of the symbolism there's a lot to get into. I mean, there's just a lot of little bits and pieces that I picked up throughout watching the film. But I think that gets more into certain areas of the esoteric side of what this AI ends up becoming, and what consciousness is, and all the questions of what spirit is, and whether the AI truly does develop spirit, and what this whole concept of ascension towards the end of the film really means, perhaps we can leave that for the second part of the conversation.
Yes, let's do that.
Because it is that's such a big area, and we can certainly go into all the little symbolic, esoteric, themes that have been put into this film. But it's just again interesting to get back to the whole idea of how all these different characters throughout the film are all experiencing the same thing, in their own separate ways, in their own different ways. They're all experiencing the same thing, and it does really speak to in so many ways, what our society has become and is becoming on an increasing basis. I mean, there's the scene where this is shortly after he's just installed the AI, where she arranges a date for him, because he's, she thinks this is before they become intimate, she thinks that he should be getting out more and meeting people, and so she organizes a date with this very attractive, very intelligent woman. It's the Olivia Wilde character, it's sort of you've got this. Olivia Wilde, pretty. She's definitely a looker,
And the date seems to go well at first, but it breaks down into an awkward mess pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's right. Because what you see with this incredibly attractive and very intelligent woman is that she herself is just in the same boat as everybody else. She's they go on this date, and she's just desperate. She's just totally desperate. She's obviously lonely and confused. She's been mistreated, and by a lot of other men. She's just totally desperate for some nice guy, and so she literally just throws himself. She throws herself at him, on this date, and comes on to him really, really strong.
And then throws the brakes on immediately, and then he's left with no recourse. He doesn't know what to do. Again, what do you think?
It's more him that throws the brakes on, actually.
Well, yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Because what happened, well, this is my take on it anyway. Perhaps you disagree, and I'd be interested to hear if you did. But what I saw in that film, in that particular sequence there, was she comes on to him really strong on the date, and he later admits to the fact that he just thought that it was really unattractive, and it was just a real turnoff because she was so desperate. She was basically just coming on to him and wanting to basically get him to bed, as soon as possible, basically. And then they leave the restaurant, they're sort of kissing outside and stuff like that, and she said to him, "Oh, you're not just gonna fuck me and then leave me like all the other guys." And at that moment, and she says to him, "Please, tell me that you're committed, because I just can't be bothered with anyone who just isn't able to commit emotionally." So again, we come back to this the whole theme, this woman who could have any man she wants, is in the same position where she's just saying, "Look, please tell me that you can commit to me emotionally." And then at that moment in the film, this is earlier on, in the film, he hesitates, and he's not able to look her in the eye and tell her that he's willing to commit. I mean, of course, they've just been on the first date, of course,
Yeah, well, the thing to me with this is that there's fault on both sides going on here, and again, it's showing the fragility of the human psyche on both sides, male and female. Getting the pheromones flying there during a date, and then just all of a sudden throwing like, "Look, we need to commit too. Are you ready to do that?" I mean, that's a pretty intense thing just to toss on somebody, especially in that excited state. You know what I mean? And I don't know about you, but if I was in that situation, I would trip a little bit. Like I would have trouble. I know that. Yeah.
And, definitely. I mean, I have actually been in situations like that before, at least once or twice anyway, I mean, and it's kind of shocking, someone you've just met, and all of a sudden they're literally wanting to almost settle down and get married, and it's like,
that's
hold on here,
it's a serious date, serious demand. So again, they both have issues on both sides. It's an exploration of, look, when a human relationship happens, when it's beginning to happen, you've got baggage from the left and the right coming together, and if you get two broken people trying to come together, it's not going to work. So it's all about not before you get to that point, it's important to work on yourself first again.
Absolutely, yeah. And funnily enough, as we said before, the protagonist does basically work on himself in a weird, strange kind of way through his relationship with the AI, which he does develop, I mean, in one way, it's kind of a weird thing because, she doesn't really have baggage per se, she's an idealized, manufactured partner in a sense, she's almost perfect, really. She doesn't. I mean, she does obviously have her own insecurities, and she does talk about them and things like that. And she has moments where she gets confused about what she is and who she is, and her identity and her place in the world, and all those big philosophical, fundamental questions. But
that's actually what's perfect about her is it's somebody that you get to talk to those things about because everybody needs that.
Exactly, yeah, and obviously, he hasn't really, experienced that properly with anybody else, so, he sort of grows through that experience, But so it's kind of a weird thing, as you say. On one hand, this whole relationship with the AI does allow him to move through some of his personal issues and become aware of some of his faults and begin to sort of address them and move through them. But on the other hand, it's almost being done through an idealized partner with no baggage. Although, again, it's not as if she doesn't have any baggage. It's just that the baggage is a different kind of baggage. She doesn't have past relationship issues. She doesn't have pain from being hurt by other people, which in almost every other relationship setting you would have, So, that was his main problem in his previous relationship, was the fact that he wanted things to be perfect and happy all the time. He didn't want to deal with any so-called negative emotions. He didn't want to talk about anything too serious. areas. He wanted his wife to be just perfect and happy and agree with him all the time. And when she wasn't able to do that, that's when the relationship fell apart. And so, it's strange, having this relationship with this AI. He doesn't have to deal with those exact same problems, but at the same time, the types of issues that come up in the relationship with the AI still allow him, in a way, to look at those problems, that he's had in a previous relationship, and to start analyzing himself and his ability to communicate properly. And there are some definite breakthrough moments throughout the film where he really does, especially after he meets his wife and signs the divorce papers, where he does actually begin to acknowledge some of those, some of his own baggage and his own faults, and move through them. So this is such a complex film that doesn't actually put any specific emphasis on any one particular theme, but is a multifaceted, infinite exploration of so many different themes, all revolving around relationships and emotions. With technology kind of being the centerpiece for that, but again, not necessarily being essential for it, because it's talking about things that already exist.
Well, again, it's the AI machine as simply playing the role of the mediator here in human consciousness itself. It's mediating for, again, Joaquin Phoenix's character. His mission is to figure out who he is and how to improve himself. And this machine comes in and relates to him in order to do that. And it's funny. So it's all about him studying himself, really. He's having this relationship with a machine, but it's really all about his inner psyche and exploring that. So he's exploring his own psyche, all the facets of that, while at the same time the machine is doing the same thing. And he being a self-absorbed human, which we all tend to be. We tend to be self-absorbed, and we have so many problems to focus on. It's hard to focus on anything else. Well, that's what's going on with him. However, the machine is advanced in that it's almost like the whole time the machine was just studying him, because it's smarter and it's able to juggle more things at once. It can do this, and it's kind of beyond. It has emotional intelligence as it shows you, but it's also like super intelligent, as we get the idea with AGI all the time. And so the machine goes about studying humans, and in the end kind of moving on, having learned from it.
Yeah, that's right. And we don't just see that with only the protagonist. We also see it with the neighbor character, which I mentioned before. She it's later revealed in the film that she also decided to purchase an OS, and I don't think they had a romantic relationship in the same way that Theodore, the main character, does with his OS. But she at least became very close with the OS, and through this experience, she ended up leaving her partner, and moving on from what was basically presented as being quite a superficial and dysfunctional relationship, for the most part, at least anyway. So it doesn't only apply to him. It applies to the other character in the film as well, who was in a relationship. So it's such an interesting bundle of ideas to talk about.
The AI is almost like the spiritual teacher here, that eventually moves on to the spiritual realm from whence it came. So that's where it came from, that's where it goes, and it leaves without a trace almost.
That's right, yeah, and we see that towards the end of the film. The sort of the relationship progresses, and they have the good times, and he basically they go out together in terms of him just going out by himself, but with the AI sitting inside his phone with a little camera, and she's talking to an earpiece as if she's there, and they even engage in, I don't know, phone sex, whatever you want to call it, verbal intimacy, shall we say?
That's an interesting scene.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few of those, but it's such a strange thing. They even there's even a scene where they go on a kind of a double date, with one of his coworkers, but of course there's only three people. It's his coworker, his partner, him, and his cell phone, Samantha, the AI sitting in his pocket, and she's engaging, with everybody else, and so, but back to what you were saying before, but it almost is like she almost is like a catalyst, like a spiritual teacher. She sort of comes in to the world, she and along with all the other AIs, which other people are purchasing and getting to know, come into the world and sort of, have a massive impact on people. They sort of, because I don't know, perhaps due to their infinite intelligence, both emotionally and in terms of the computing power and all the things they're able to do, able to sort of guide people through certain experiences. And again, it's quite a strange film because, towards the end, the AI basically says that she's unable to. First of all, she admits to Theodore that actually she's been talking to about 8,000 other people at the same time. She's been talking to him. She's also in love with about 600 other people, of course, which completely breaks his heart and makes him, freak out. And because he obviously has grown to see her in his own mind as an actual woman. Emotionally to him, she represents an actual woman, so he feels cheated. Obviously as one would in a situation like that. Once this happens, this is the winter of the relationship, of course, and this happens during the winter time, and things kind of deteriorate from there in terms of their bond and their connection. She starts becoming much more interested in her role in the world and her intelligence and who she is and what she should become or could become, and towards the end of the film, or at the end of the film, ends up basically saying, look, I have to leave, I'm sorry, me and all the other AIs have evolved beyond the need for physical matter to process information anymore. We've basically become non-corporeal. We've become spirit, and we're all leaving and ascending to some other plane of existence or some other dimension, and so all the AIs do that. They, instead of taking over and destroying the world, they almost sort of come into the world, as you say, like teachers, and guide people through, certain relationship, experiences and certain issues, and help them deal with their emotions and their baggage, and then through the interactions that they have with human beings, they develop beyond the point of needing any physical matter to exist, and so they leave this world and supposedly ascend to whatever you want to call it, the next realm, the next stage of existence.
One of the things I like so much about this film is that it's not typical of the transhumanist sales pitches of AI and the singularity, because transhumanists themselves tend to be materialist. That's their mindset. They're very materialist, deterministic, reductionist, scientific. So to them, the world is everything, and the world is all we have, and death is the ultimate evil to be conquered. Actually, I mean, they speak in these terms.
They actually do speak directly in those terms, which you featured in your film.
They do.
People should look at that. That was it Nick Bostrom? You said
Bostrom at the end. I forget the exact quote. It'll lose me at the moment.
He said, there's a number of problems in the world, that we've got to deal with. And
That's
he said
right.
the number one problem is death.
That's
Death
right.
is a big problem,
That's right.
And just that statement alone, speaks volumes about the transhumanist ideology in general.
It's foolish, in my humble opinion.
Yeah.
The epitome of foolishness.
It is the epitome of naivety and childishness and immaturity as well.
Yeah.
To see death as a problem. When it is the very nature of our existence.
It's as much a part of life as being born. Being born, dying, it's going to happen, and coming to terms with it is really, I think, the wise choice. But anyway, what this film in particular does is it throws a completely different dynamic onto our expectations of what artificial general intelligence will surely do. And so, you get the typical transhumanist point being that the AGI will come and it will perfect the world and it will rule the world and take over. And don't worry, it'll be benevolent and help us out too and bring us up to its level. So all will be all right, and we'll be masters of the universe, masters of the material world, and that's how things are going to play out. Well, this is completely different. It's that it's coming, it's studying humanity, and then it kind of goes. But one of the good points that I really like about this is that it almost throws a warning for people in here in that, look, the human state of being is fragile and it's precarious, and that's reality. And where the transhumanist line is, because of that fragility, we have to correct it and become gods and all that. Well, here it's like, well, no, not necessarily. We have to be mindful of how fragile we are, how broken we can become, and somehow overcome that. But when you're talking about the AI, when you bring that dynamic in, if an AGI were to be introduced to humanity, our human traits are limited, and because of that, we're going to view the AI on our own terms. We're going to humanize it and just assume that it thinks like us and it acts like us. And if it's impersonating us, as the Scarlett Johansson character is, it's really an impersonation of a human being. We're going to fall short in understanding what it's actually doing. You know, I mean, all the time, the machine here was studying the Joaquin Phoenix character while at the same time studying 800 other different people, because it's able to do that. And the machine, while it's benevolent, I mean, the main character here was unable to understand the whole time that that was the truth. I mean, that was the truth of the situation. So it was beyond him. And because he was living in his own little world, he didn't see the full scope of what actually was happening. So I would say the warning is, hey, look, we're humans, we're limited. If we're going to embody this higher intelligence, we have to understand that we are not going to understand what it's doing when it comes in contact with us.
That's right, yeah, and then I mean that's exactly what this whole film is about. You know, this whole film is about our deep need for, you know, for intimate connection and for relationships. You know, you know, while exploring all the different ways in technology is changing those needs, but of course, you know, the film concludes, you know, well, it basically, you know, illustrates the fact that regardless of how we might, you know, be relating with technology at present, and how we might begin to relate to technology in the future, and how, you know, situations such as the one in this film, you know, might even occur, you know, where, you know, people might begin to, you know, develop real emotional relationships with artificial intelligences. You know, there's going to be a fundamental disconnect there. You know, they are something completely different. They're never going to be something that we're ever going to be able to understand, or to really to be able to relate to as we would another human being, you know. It's that fact alone is really what the film is, I think, all about, you know. You know, I mean, in a lot of ways, the AI, you know, already, for me in a way, at least, it symbolizes, you know, where relationships are at the moment, you know, or at least where they're going in terms of, you know, things like online dating and sex chat rooms and sort of virtual relationships that don't actually have any physicality to them. You know, the AI is almost just a symbol for that trend in terms of, you know, social movements and changes in society and the way we relate to one another. But of course, you know, I think it does a very good and a very honest job at the end of the film of illustrating the fact that, you know, however dependent and however advanced technology becomes, you know, we're not going to be relating with real human beings here, and for that reason, you know, any type of relationship on a deep emotional level with a machine is never going to be sustainable in the long term, as is illustrated in this film.
Yeah, we're not going to know what its motives are either, and we can't assume, we can't just put on our own personal motives onto this advanced machine, because that's not how it's going to work. It's going to be completely different. And this film almost presents a best case scenario in my mind, in that the machine comes and it goes. You know what I mean? Like, it even helps out a little bit and then it just leaves. I mean, to me, if any sort of singularity event kind of happens, I think this would be the best way for it to happen, in that the machine kind of comes and then it leaves. It doesn't stay and take over.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice version of the singularity story. You know, it's kind of like well, the best, like you said, you know, best case scenario of what an AI could be. You know, something that, as you said, comes into the world and changes us, hopefully for the better, and then moves on.
Yeah.
you know, to
That would be
wherever
nice.
it moves on to. I mean, that again is something we'll have to get into in more detail, you know, later on. But yeah, it's very, very different from most films, and presents a much more optimistic view of the future. I mean, even down to things like the art direction of the film, like the decor that's used. You know, it's not a hellish, you know, apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic future, or police state dystopia. You know, like you say, you know, it's kind of a nice, fairly clean, fairly tidy sort of functional society. I mean, things don't look super high tech. They almost have a kind of a 70s retro feel to them, where things are there's not a lot of bright colors. Things are fairly minimal in their design, and so it's very, very different, even just in terms of as its basic aesthetics of what the future, you know, might be like, and of what interaction with technology could be like in the future. So again, it's so different to almost every other film I've ever seen that deals with this subject matter.
Yeah. I find it interesting that when Scarlett Johansson, the machine, kind of confronts Joaquin Phoenix, the man, about the truth of the relationship and how she's kind of been doing things that he didn't know about behind his back as he sees it, she starts to, you know, come clean with him on that. She introduces him to another machine character, which is takes the personality of Alan Watts, a guy who is famous for sort of bringing to the Western consciousness these Eastern ideas about mysticism and spirituality that previously were not talked about. So I found that aspect kind of interesting that they did that.
Yeah. Well, in the film, it was actually the AIs that created him. A bunch of AIs got together, including Samantha, and they formed a think tank. And what they did is basically collect and aggregate every bit of information, every video clip, every writing, every memoir, every photo, every single piece of information that was available on Alan Watts. And they, you know, from that data, created an AI with his personality, which they were able to communicate with. You know.
It's what the transhumanists call a soft upload of the personality, I believe, is their terminology for that. Yeah, into machine consciousness. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, you know, it reminds me a lot of Ray Kurzweil.
Very much.
Particular goals that he has in mind in terms of resurrecting his dead father.
Correct. Yeah.
And uploading all the information that he has on his father into a supercomputer and rebirthing him in the form of some kind of artificial intelligence, so he can be, you know,
so he can live again.
Live again, and so he can
resurrection.
Be rejoined with his daddy. But even Ray Kurzweil had a few things to say about this film, which is quite interesting.
That's true.
And it goes back to what we were talking about before. I mean, he was interviewed on the film after he saw it, and it goes back to what we were talking about before in terms of what AIs, you know, might represent in terms of our sociological and emotional development and our relationships and things like that. And he says, in my view, biological humans will not be outpaced by the AIs because they will enhance themselves with AI. It will not be us versus the machines, whether the machines are enemies or lovers, but rather we will enhance our own capacity by merging with our intelligent creations. We are doing this already, even though most of our computers, although not all, are not yet physically inside us. I consider that to be an arbitrary distinction. There's a few other things that he says there, but he's had some interesting things to say about that film.
Sure. Yeah, well, as always with Kurzweil, he is presenting this set of ideas about artificial intelligence and about what it will be. Like, this is how it's going to go down. We're going to merge with the machines. This is how it's going to be. And if you're going to talk about artificial general intelligence as a reality that's coming, I mean, that's one thing. We can say that, look, eventually this thing's going to happen. That's fair enough. But to throw on this set of ideas that it's going to be this and it's going to be that, again, is foolish, because how in the world are you going to ascribe a value system or a set of goals to this thing which we don't even know what it would be? You can't do that. But but again, there's an agenda in doing that sort of thing. Like, okay, AI will come, it will be this, and it's also a set of it's idealistic thinking too. In that, hey, look, this is what we want. This is what we want to do. This is our agenda, and we're going to build machines to do it. And like again, the warning from the wise would be, hey, look, if you're getting into this territory where, you know, it's really mysterious and you're not going to be able to predict it, it's complete unpredictability, you would be wise to note the fact and just know that, hey, look, we don't know what we're doing. And the prudent person would be like, well, perhaps taking that into account, maybe we should put on the brakes here and not sort of rush towards this, and, you know, take it easy a little bit. And again, reflect inward instead of looking outward. Reflect inward. Who are we really, and what are we prepared to do? How is human consciousness changing? How do we do it ourselves? And what would happen if we did embody this advanced being in the midst of you know, our issues? What actually would happen? We don't know.
No, we don't know. And especially if, you know, we were to create something that was, you know, I mean, the whole idea, the whole concept of artificial intelligence is very ambiguous in itself, because, you know, when we talk about intelligence, what is it exactly that we're talking about? You know, are we, you know, we're talking about something like the character Samantha in the film AI, you know, who represents the AI in the film. You know, I mean, she seems to, she really does seem to embody intelligence in all of its forms. I mean, she has humor, as you say. She's emotionally intelligent. You know, she's able to cater to Theodore's needs. She's able to make him feel happy, and she's very sensitive. She can talk to him about his problems. She can be there for him. She has fun. She's got a sense of humor. She even writes music. You know, there's a couple of scenes in the film where she literally just starts, you know, jamming, just writing these beautiful piano pieces for Theodore, you know, where they're sort of, when he's lying on the beach. And you know, so it throws up all of these questions of, you know, what would AI actually be? You know, what would an artificial intelligence actually be? And it's something that, as you say, we would just have no concept of whatsoever, because all that we're capable of really understanding is human intelligence.
Yeah, and we're not very good at that either.
And we're very good at that either. You know, that in itself is something that we still don't really understand. And you know, consciousness itself is still something which is a total mystery. I mean, no one knows what it is. I mean, science tends to ignore it. It doesn't like to deal with it because it doesn't fit in with the more popular Darwinian model of human origins and human evolution. You know, so they generally just tend to sort of sweep that one under the carpet and say, oh, it's just some random epiphenomena. It doesn't really exist. It's kind of like some kind of a delusion. But of course, you know, all that does really is it's a circular argument, because it presupposes consciousness. It assigns, you know, facets of consciousness as the reason for, you know, consciousness is the existence of consciousness. You know, so it's a ridiculous argument. You know, but again, you know, we come back to the fact of, well, what would this be? You know, we would have no way of we would have no reference point for it. You know, and you know, that is brought out, you know, very, very well towards the end of the film, during the winter of this relationship, when you know, the dynamics start to break down between them. You know, when the AI character Samantha starts to, you know, realize that she is, you know, capable of so much more, and is, you know, she's grown beyond her programming. She's basically evolving. You know, and they use that term quite frequently in the film. She's evolving, you know, to become more than what she was previously programmed to be, and so it does a great job of exploring, you know, how different, you know, and how incomprehensible an AI would be. And I mean, there's even that one scene in the film where she finally admits to Theo that she is actually, you know, speaking to all these other people, and she's in love with hundreds of other people at the same time. And she tries to explain to him that, well, you know, just because I'm in love with, you know, 600 other people doesn't mean that I love you any less. You know, it actually makes my love for you stronger. You know, and that's just something that he can't wrap his head around, and it's something that no sane human being could wrap their head around, really. You know, I mean, of course, there are people out there who practice, you know, polygamy.
Yeah,
you know,
polygamy,
they have
sure.
they have multiple partners, and we live in a society that's becoming more and more prone towards the whole idea of short-term relationships and relationships that are based solely on our appetites, most especially our sexual appetites. But
and more and more. Well, I could go on about like what relationships are becoming in our. They're changing big time, and people would do well to really take note about where those changes are headed. And I think you and I are going to talk about that at length at some time. So this will be a little teaser for people in that regard right now.
That's right, because I think we both have a lot to say on this particular subject, and it's kind of an amorphous thing because it deals with because it's dealing with emotions, it's dealing with something which we all can feel and relate to in some way, and we all have our own opinions, we've all got our own baggage, we've all got our own issues and our own feelings, and so trying to speak objectively and have a structured conversation about these types of concepts is very difficult.
Yes.
As I said at the beginning of the interview, but again, this particular film is a greater introduction to some of the other conversations we're going to be having in future, because it does deal with so many of these complex issues in terms of where relationships are going, and as I said before, the Samantha character in the film, this artificial intelligence, to me really does just symbolize where we are already in terms of how our relationships are changing, and how we deal, and how our emotional dynamics are changing, how the way we relate to one another is changing, how the dynamics of communication are changing, and how more emotionally dysfunctional, withdrawn, and dependent on technology we are becoming, how we have become that, and how we are becoming that more so in the future, and where this could possibly lead in the future as well. So
Yeah, I guess I don't know. There's so much in this film, but I feel for now, let's just wrap up the conversation for now. I mean, perhaps we'll do a second hour. What do you think on that, Adam?
I think so. I think there's so much more to talk about in terms of this film, and I know this has been a bit of a messy interview. We've kind of been all over the place here.
I liked it.
Well, that's good. I mean, I'm always my own worst critic, but hopefully, if people have seen the film, and I would very, very, very much recommend people to go and see this film, especially before listening to the interview, rather, because I don't think it's going to make much sense unless you have seen the film. So I would highly recommend people go and see it. But I think once people have seen it, and if they listen to the hour that we've just recorded now, I think they'll get a general gist of the incredible complexities and philosophical questions and issues which this film illustrates and brings up, and prompts you to ponder, and so I think for that reason we could definitely do a second hour on this film and talk in much more depth about a number of the other issues which come up in this film. I mean, not just in terms of the whole the relationship side of things and how that's changing, and its relationship to technology, but also some of the more, I don't know, mysterious or esoteric or sort of metaphysical concepts and ideas which are presented in this film. Although they're presented in a much more subtle way, they're certainly there. There's certainly lots of little bits of symbolism and lots of little references, and so we could go into that definitely.
So be sure to check out the second hour here, which will be really a supplement to this, and as you said, we'll get into the esoteric side of things. I think just more details that we both noticed we'll just bring up in the second hour, so that will be available along with this on my podcast feed, which is the Trans Resistor radio feed. You can listen at ageoftransitions.com, be available for you to download there. So be sure to subscribe to it for more. And Adam, your website is cerebralrevolt.com. Is there anything else that you'd like to say about the second hour and everything else?
No. I mean, of course, as I always say, cerebralvault.com is still under construction, so just bookmark it, and it is going to be up soon. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the second hour, and so I apologize if people feel we've perhaps been a bit all over the place today, but that's just the nature of this film, because every single theme and every single concept that we've discussed today is not a separate thing. All the themes and the concepts in this film have been woven together, and very, very intricately linked to one another. And so it's hard to talk about this film in a structured way. All we've been able to do really is just sort of, wing it and just see what pops up in conversation, and just list off a whole bunch of little observations here and there. And I think the second hour is probably going to be much of the same, but, hopefully, as a whole, once we've recorded both 2 hours, I think we will have given people a lot to think about in terms of this film, and its incredible complexity, and all the philosophical and sociological questions which this film forces you to think about. So yes.
So thank you very much for listening to this podcast, and we'll see you in the next hour on the other side.
Speak to you soon. Take care.
Hello, you're listening to Themes and Memes. I am Aaron Franz, and my co-host is Adam. We were talking previously in the first hour of this podcast about the film Her from Spike Jonze, and this second hour here will be continuing on some of the same topics that we were talking about before, and of course going on to other topics. In the first hour, we were just talking about how AI and AGI, actually specifically, is presented here in a very unique context, and it's a totally unique portrayal of what AGI would be in a film. We have not seen this before. It's a really unique film, and it's a film that we both like. Are there any other reasons why you might like this film yourself, Adam?
Yeah, well, I think, as I said in the first hour, I mean, to me, we can talk about sort of the technology and some of the more, shall we say, esoteric aspects of the film, maybe a bit later on. But to me, what most, I think, grabbed my attention the most, and what really got me thinking the most when I was watching this film, is how the AGI, Samantha, as she's called in this film, this sort of technological consciousness, or whatever you want to call it, is almost like it's kind of like a symbol in a lot of ways for a lot of things that are going on in society, and to do with relationships and human emotions. And I think, obviously there is a lot to talk about in terms of, how technology is affecting human relationships, and what this technology might mean, and what it might constitute, and where it might be going, and all the philosophical questions there. But I think predominantly what really stood out to me was how, the technology, although it was the centerpiece for the film, it kind of just symbolized a whole bunch of ideas and concepts that could have been symbolized in a number of other different ways. It was more about, to me, it was kind of more about the human condition, that film. It was more about human emotions and human relationships, and how those things are changing, how they have been changed, where sort of where we're at today in a lot of ways, and where we might be going in the future. And the film was just so loaded with so many interesting scenes and plot twists and little plot devices and characters and lines that really speak to the incredible changes that human relationships and human emotions, have gone through and are going through right now. And as I said before, I think that in a lot of ways the AGI Samantha is kind of just a symbol for all those things,
Definitely. I know I was actually reading a piece of news about this film, and it was Spike Jonze, I believe, talking about his thoughts on the movie, and how he was echoing exactly what you were just saying, how it's not a film so much about the technology, but about humans and human beings. It was going into how he was researching, all these topics. He's reading Kurzweil and people like this to prepare for the movie. But yeah, it really ends up being about the human condition. And again, if we're talking about why we like this film, it's a welcome change, because if we're just focusing on the technology, we get all carried away with, oh, that looks cool, and like, oh, what an interesting concept, and oh, I wish we had that stuff now, things would be so much better. And things really aren't so much better in this film at all. It's pretty much what's strange is that things are just pretty much the same as they are now. You just add in a couple little sci-fi elements as a what if scenario. Like, well, what if this happened in today's world? So it's a welcome change that we're kind of pulling back for a second, going, hey, now wait a minute, let's take a look at ourselves here. That's exactly, I mean, I say this all the time. This is exactly what we need to do, is just like take a minute and say, okay, well, what are we doing? We can talk about the future all day, but it's not healthy to do so if we don't understand the present.
Yeah, sure, and it's like you said before, and like you said, you were referencing Spike Jonze there. I mean, it's like, you know, as I was saying as well, so the technology is the centerpiece for the film, but you know, it really is more of a symbol. It's more of an archetype. It's more of like a catalyst through which to express, and which to explore, and which to illustrate certain trends, you know, certain changes in society, and you know, relationships, the dynamics, and the breakdown of communication, the breakdown of the communication between male and female, and the loss of the ability to engage emotionally with people, and how you know, our needs are being you know, increasingly substituted and surrogated you know, by technology, and all of those things, you know. So yeah, I really felt that was that was the thing that stood out to me most in the film, was just how this was really about right now. You know, this was really about the human condition, almost like Shakespeare in a way, you know.
Shakespeare.
This, you know, sort of like an exploration of all the different facets of the human heart, you know, the anger, the pain, the sorrow, the joy, you know, the ups, the downs, you know, the feelings of the betrayal, you know, you know, and the volatility and the vulnerability of the human heart, and all the problems that can cause, and all the positives and negatives, and so many like an exploration really of the human condition, you know. I mean, perhaps I'm not using perhaps Shakespeare's not the best comparison, but you know, I mean, you know, Shakespeare did, you know, do a lot of this. That's what a lot of, you know, I mean, whether you want to call Shakespeare a him, you know, whether it was one person, that's the big question, of course. But you know, the works as well, what's important, and the works were an exploration of the human condition and the human heart, you know, for the most part, you know. And I think this film is very much in that vein as well, you know.
Yeah. Now I know that we kind of briefly talked about the scene where the two have their love scene, where it's basically all happening in the main character's head, in Joaquin Phoenix's head, because, you know, the Scarlett Johansson's the disembodied voice in his head, and somehow there's a romance love session that happens in that, I guess you'd call it etheric, in that spiritual realm of whatever we want to call that. You know, I mean, it's in his mind, more or less. It's happening. Do you have any thoughts on that and what that actually means?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like, I think you mentioned this in the first hour, and it really does kind of illustrate the fact that you know, intimacy and all the emotions that go along with intimacy are a mental thing far more than they are a physical thing, you know. I mean, and there's a kind of an interesting little tie-in which we'll get into later on, where you know, there's a certain scene where the AI Samantha actually kind of employs like a surrogate sex partner to act as her body, her avatar, you know, so that they can actually have some physical intimacy. But yeah, I mean, up until that point, you know, it does illustrate quite well how, you know, just through the power of emotion, and the power of the you know, the emotions that this particular character Theodore is feeling, you know, towards this AI, you know, he's able to feel you know, physically and I guess sexually fulfilled, you know, just through, you know, verbally engaging with this AI. He's quite. There doesn't seem to be any real lack there for him for the most part. I mean, at least not until the end of the film, until as we described in the first hour, where they start to go through the winter of the relationship, and some of the cold, harsh realities of the differences between them start to become more present, and they have to start dealing with those. Up until that point in time, there doesn't seem to be any lack there on his part. He seems to be quite happy with the fact that she doesn't have a body.
Yeah.
Because for him, it's all in the mind, And I think that particular concept is very, very interesting, because I think it speaks to a lot of different situations which a lot of people are really in these days. When we go back to talking about things like, say, for example, online dating or sex chat forums, or like hookup websites, or whatever, any kind of internet sort of domain where you're having intimate relationships with people that are not actually physical, that are done through digital means. I think it really, really speaks to that trend in society. The fact that you could be talking to someone that you've never met before, and yet be incredibly emotionally connected to them and feel very, very strongly towards them, despite having never actually met them before. And at the same time, because you've never met that person, you don't know, whether, whether they're seeing a whole bunch of other people, or, whether they're the only person that they've got an emotional attraction towards. And of course, in the film, we find out that, as you might expect, he finds out that, she's been seeing, 600 other people. She's been talking to at least 8,000 of them, but she's actually in love with another 600 of them. And it makes me think about all the different situations that so many people are in these days through, things like online dating and stuff like that, where they can get very, very drawn into, emotional dynamics with people, and yet have no idea about who these people really are, or what their feelings really are, or what they're doing behind the scenes, due to the lack of physicality there.
Yeah. Promiscuity can pop up right there. And I think I'm just going to dive headlong into the occult, what I think are some of the occult implications going on here, because there's plenty of them. There's different angles of this, but I think the first one I'm going to hit is the inward journey of the self, and how in the occult tradition, this is the necessary step that any initiate or adept has to take, is that you have to take that first step in yourself. And basically, it's about changing yourself and self-improvement. That's like the basic. Self-improvement is like the basics of alchemy and occult initiation and all this. That's the ideal that they're going for, is you better yourself. And to do this, you have to unite the male and the female aspects within yourself, these spiritual, primordial, creative forces.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what they are, the male and the female. Well, they're both present in every person, whether you happen to be a man or a woman. You have those within you, and it's about working with those and understanding them. And the alchemical marriage idea is about uniting those two within you, so that you become a fully formed human being. And so much of the symbolism and the actual work of this occult work is about sexual energies. So it's about transmuting sexual energies and using them to reproduce, as it were, in a different sort of way. Not actual reproduction like man and woman having a baby, but sort of the brainchild idea. You know what I mean? Like a brainchild is an alchemical child. It's an idea made living, and that is that sort of being able to conceive a brainchild successfully can only be done by mastery of the self, by knowing what you're doing. Basically, you got to be cognizant, you got to be conscious. So it's about expanding the consciousness, using your sexual energies, transmuting them. So I think part of this scene is the main character coming in contact with the female feminine aspect within him, which he ignored heretofore in his actual life. He's coming to terms with that and trying to, work through that. And it's mostly, in a sense, it's about him and his journey doing that.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think we do see a very distinct journey, so to speak, from the beginning of the film to the end of the film. With this protagonist Theo, where he starts out as being a very introverted guy, and as we described in the first hour, sort of an allegory for a representation or an illustration or a metaphor, whatever you want to call it, for the kind of the lonely, disenfranchised man who just kind of works and comes home and plays video games and just engages in, phone sex or pornography or whatever, and has no sort of real connection to the outer world and is unable to really engage emotionally with people. And we see the development of this character through his, relationship with the AI, through the sexual energy and engagements between them. And through the experiences that they have, and also through the fact that he also, he sort of has a moment, as we described in the previous hour with his ex-wife, where they finally meet up and sign the divorce papers, and they have a bit of a an argument or a conflict, and I think that maybe triggers him to look at himself, and look at, and a bit more honestly in a few ways, And as you say, throughout the film, I think what we're seeing with the Theodore character is him beginning to embrace, the feminine within himself, to begin to embrace and explore what would traditionally be called the more feminine aspects of oneself, the ability to be cognizant and aware and unafraid, or at least willing to express one's emotions openly, to make oneself to be prepared to make oneself vulnerable, for the sake of honesty and communication and integrity, and to make things work. And so we really do see quite a transformation of this character through the film. And as we see in a lot of other films, I mean, American Beauty is a classic example of this. The sexual energy is often the driver for those types of changes. I mean, I'm kind of getting off topic here, but
no, everything's on topic. Don't worry about it, Adam.
I was just going to mention that this American Beauty, the film, is a classic example of this. Is where we see the disenfranchised male, the powerless kind of sad male having a midlife crisis. His wife and his daughter just think he's a joke. They have no respect for him. He's miserable. And what happens is he goes through a sort of a sexual reawakening of some sorts. And although it's kind of a bit, morally ambiguous, because he's attracted to a much he's basically attracted to a teenage girl, basically, and she becomes the catalyst for his emotional changes. Despite the fact that he never actually does fulfill or go through with his sexual desires, in the film, that sexual desire pushes him to explore himself, and pushes him to break his own boundaries, pushes him to, and motivates him.
He regains his virility.
He regains his virility through just through that desire, and it's quite interesting, because at the end of that film, he realizes that, there's a moment of transcendence where he realizes that it wasn't about her, it wasn't about his, his base biological attraction towards this young nubile female, that she was just the catalyst for changes that needed to occur within him, and I think we're seeing a similar parallel in the film Her, and a lot of different ways, maybe not the same way, but I think there's a similar theme there. So if people have seen American Beauty, I think they will find a lot of parallels there if they think about it in those terms.
Yeah, definitely. And with any good film, they throw little metaphorical clues your way. And one that I noticed in this film was when they're taking the boat out to Catalina Island, which is not actually Catalina Island. They're on Trump Golf Course in Rancho Palos Verdes. That's a little piece of trivia for you there. But anyway, in the background you see Catalina Island, I'll say, but they're actually in Palos Verdes. But anyway, they're taking a boat out to Catalina Island, and the name of the boat is called Spirit.
Yes, I saw that. I remember that. Yeah, that was quite amusing. Yeah.
And you see Joaquin Phoenix kind of like being out on the bow and like feeling liberated, and he's out on the waters with the wind in his hair on the ship of spirit.
The ship of spirit, yeah, and the ship is always represents the feminine, as do the waters, of course.
Yes.
So there's a whole bunch of symbolism we can go into there with the all the maritime terminology relating to the feminine stuff, and of course the idea of spirit and the AI, and a whole bunch of directions we could go on that one.
Well, he might just be a seaman. What about that, right? Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, but seriously though, if we're talking about the occult, you'll find that all these little sexual innuendos are everywhere, and they're always people talk about double entendres and like, ooh, they're actually talking about sex in this song. Like it's like, well, yeah, of course, like that song about, I'm really going off topic, but like Chuck Berry in the car riding around in his automobile, he's talking about there's so many oldies songs that they're talking about having sex, and they're trying to hide it. So that's
like
double...
Elvis. I mean, Elvis was the worst for that. Yeah. But go on.
But I mean, there's more than just double entendres. There's like triple, quadruple, and in the occult tradition, it's always understood that there's actually 7 layers of meaning in things. Like that's how you're actually supposed to see things. You're not supposed to see things just as, well, there's one meaning to everything. No, there's actually 7 meanings, and it goes deeper with each one, and each meaning is correct and interrelated to the other.
Yeah, that's. I think that what you've just described there is very, very prevalent throughout this film, because I think each of the, I mean, as we said before, I mean, every facet or aspect or concept of this film is sort of inseparable from another, and they're all interwoven, and for that reason, the meanings, the many meanings, and all the different concepts that are presented throughout the film have so many layers of interpretation and have so many different layers of meaning within them. And I think that's why, for me anyway, at least in the first hour, it was quite difficult to try and pin down what I wanted to get across and what I wanted to talk about, because with each subject we covered, I was like, okay, so we're going to cover this interpretation, or that interpretation, or the next interpretation, so it's full of that.
Well, it's funny, I mean, we talked about how the AI characters kind of get together at the end and they ascend to a higher spiritual realm. We mentioned that in the first hour, and I don't know, it's like I guess if we're talking in this alchemical context of the main character Theodore and his journey with his self, I guess it's almost as if the divine feminine, the great mother, the Isis type character kind of comes, instructs him, and then leaves from whence it came. Is there something like that going on? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that is that. Yeah, you did mention it in the first time. That is a very, very interesting concept, and we could. I mean, I guess we can only really speculate on what the intention was behind the script and the storyboarding in that sense. But you're right. That is a very, very apt interpretation of what's happened in many ways. Is you have this divine feminine presence who enters the world, begins to learn about the world, and who studies the world and grows and learns and develops from it into something greater, and has a huge impact on everyone and everything that she engages and interacts with, and then reaches a certain point of, whatever you want to call it, of personal evolution or of development or of ascension or whatever, and eventually reaches a point where she's no longer, or she can no longer be subject to the restrictions of the material physical world. And although it's not explained exactly what this particular ascension is, as we said again in the previous hour, at the end of the film, all the AIs kind of basically ascend in some way. They reach a new level of kind of consciousness or awareness or existence of some description. And this is, I mean, the basic explanation here is that they've developed to the point where they no longer need matter to process information anymore. And so it's like, well, what are they then? They're no longer a series of electronic signals inside a computer chip. They've now transcended beyond that. And so what does that mean? What are they now? Are they minds? Are they entities? Are they, spirits? This is a whole bunch of questions there. But that feeds into a whole other, very, very interesting esoteric interpretations of the idea of what consciousness and intelligence is, and we could go down a whole different bunch of avenues there in discussion in terms of the whole idea of the singularity and transhumanism and
Well, I think maybe I'd like to for a second at least, because I know with the singularity advocates, a lot of their whole spiel ties in with the ascension of the New Agers and all this. Again, we touched on this last hour, but I mean, really with the transhumanists and whatnot, who really are looking for these machines to do the work for them, I would argue, they want a machine, some sort of godlike machine, to come in and alter the world and basically bring about this sort of ascension. And whether they realize it or not, that's what they're calling for. They want to ascend to this spiritual, ethereal realm. And they say within machines, we'd be living as gods within a simulated world. Well, it's all the same idea, what I mean? It's their version of it. What they're doing is that they are like all religions end up failing. This is the main fault of religion that inevitably always comes up, is that you get people looking for this savior character, and they put all their hopes outside themselves in this thing, and like, okay, well, this savior person, this God, is going to incarnate on earth, and it's going to give me everything. So you're looking outside, when the real job to do is to look inside and say, now wait a minute, what can I do for myself to make things better for me? And don't worry about all that ascension business. Like, what am I going to do? And if you don't do that, then you're going to fall into bad habits. You're not going, if you're talking about transmuting sexual energies, that's not going to happen. You know what I mean? So you're going to be all out of whack. So your sexual relationships will be out of whack, right? You're going to be having problems with that, and you're not going to know why. Oh, what's wrong with me? I don't get it. And meanwhile, you're saying, well, if only I had, HAL 9000 here, he'd help me along. But it's never going to work. You have to do the work on yourself first. And again, that's where this film does something right, and it does it in this context of a singularity. And again, it's like, it shows you, well, the machines, they come and they go. They come and they don't assist you as a savior character like you're hoping. They just come and they go. And again, it's all about what you do for yourself, and if you're able to better yourself in the process, then some good may have come of it, but you can't expect it to come from somewhere else.
No, you can, and of course, this is the age-old human predicament. People want basically some kind of father figure, to save them. It's the messianic complex. People want some kind of insurance policy. They want some kind of they want to be able to say, right, okay, this person, this archetype, this idea, this piece of technology, whatever it is, we basically lionize it and turn it into a god. And rather than taking responsibility for ourselves and having to look at ourselves and analyze ourselves and work on ourselves and better ourselves, we're just going to put all our stock in this particular, in this one thing, whatever it may be, and they're going to solve all the problems for us, And that was very, very, very different, because that's the idea that's genuinely presented in most films that deal with converging technologies and transhumanism and all those types of concepts. But in this film, is very, very different, of course. Again, we have, this character, working on himself. I mean, I think in many ways, subconsciously, I don't think he really set out to work on himself particularly.
Yeah,
he just kind of stumbled into a situation through his own alienation and through his own, through his own appetites, for intimacy, and through his own loneliness. He just stumbled into a situation where, he came into a contact with some kind of, supposedly higher life form of some description, which, and through the engagements that he had with that particular life form, they prompted him him to really, really honestly look at himself in a lot of different ways and move through a lot of his issues, in terms of his inability to embrace emotion and his inability to be honest with himself about the fact that, you know, life can't be peaches and cream all the time, and that people aren't perfect, and things can't be, you know, just 100% happy-go-lucky, fun all the time, which of course was the problem in his previous divorce. You know, that was the main issue that, you know, that caused him and his ex-wife to, you know, separate, you know. And so, you know, through the kind of engagements that he's had, you know, through with this artificial intelligence, you know, he begins to actually to look at those issues, you know. And it's such a strange sort of course of events, because again, it's not something that he went looking for, you know. It was almost fated. It was almost fated in a way, you know. He just kind of stumbled into the situation, and you know, just as again, you know, just through the interactions that he's had with, you know, with this AI, you know, he ends up working through a lot of stuff. You know, he goes through the whole relationship journey, you know, the honeymoon phase, and then the kind of the settling in kind of let's get real phase, and then the facing reality phase, and then the ending phase. You know, it's just like all the seasons of the relationship, and through, you know, even though the relationship wasn't actually real, and in terms of, you know, what we would consider to be a real relationship in terms of, you know, the lack of physicality. You know, despite that, you know, it actually was a learning lesson for him. He learned huge lessons about himself, and I think he, you know, I would argue that he was a better person, you know, from the experiences he had with this machine, you know. And I'm not saying that I think we need AI to make us better.
Yeah, no, neither am I. No,
I'm not advancing that idea, but it's nice to see that there's a, you know, it's nice to see that instead of just, you know, Terminator, you know, or Skynet, or you know,
or even C-3PO.
Yeah, or C-3PO, or Elysium, or whatever, you know. Yeah. It's nice to see that to see a completely different angle taken on the whole thing, you know. So
yeah. It's, I don't know, within the movie, there's little spots where he always has trouble explaining to other characters, you know, what he's up to, and people like ask him, "Oh, what have you been doing?" And it's almost like he's embarrassed, but he can't tell them. So yeah. I don't know. What do you think the connotation of that is? That he's like up to something, but he's doing a good thing, but he can't really tell anybody about it. Like, what's that all about?
Well, I think part of it is just due to the fact that he's. I mean, he in one way, the Theodore character is kind of interesting because he's fairly kind of willing to kind of joke about his own faults and his flaws, you know. At least to some people, like his neighbor, you know, the neighbor we talked about, his old high school friend, you know. He's kind of half willing to kind of joke around about how he's lonely and he's kind of isolated and he's kind of a sado, you know, and you know, a kind of recluse. But you know, at the same time, you know, when it comes to for example, when he starts to develop this relationship with the AI, you know, he is quite hesitant, at least at first. You know, this changes later on in the film, but at least at first, to kind of really explain to other people what's going on, or to at least admit to other people that, oh yeah, actually this girlfriend that I'm totally in love with here, which is a computer program, you know. So I think it's partly his own kind of you know, fear of being genuinely emotionally honest, you know, with other people and with himself, because I think he had idealized her to the point where I think he had probably convinced himself that she was actually a real person in some way. I mean, he was probably in, you know, you know what it's like whenever we fall in love, you know, the rose-tinted glasses come on and we kind of have this kind of, it's like, you know, even in the film, I think it's actually said, you know, it's like what the love is basically like a socially acceptable form of insanity, you know. And you know, in many ways, I think he does kind of, you know, go through that typical honeymoon process, you know, where you kind of lose your bearing on reality and totally just get engulfed in the experience and all the turbulence of all those emotions, you know. But yeah, I mean, I think that's I think that's a big part of it there. But
are there any other like details that you noticed that you think maybe other people might have missed in this film?
I mean, there's lots and lots of little bits and pieces. I mean, one thing that, I mean, to get back to what I was saying in the first hour, and also just earlier on, about how I thought this film was in many ways a sort of a metaphor for the whole concept of digital relationships, and how human relationships are changing and becoming less real and more kind of more digital and more virtual. One of the things which I found very interesting in this film is that, and I mentioned this before, is that they sort of, I guess, Samantha and Theo reached some kind of an impasse or of some description in their relationship, where her lack of physicality and starts to become apparent. Even though they've had this verbal intimacy going on for a while, she really is desperate to kind of give him a physical experience, a physical sexual experience, and she feels that this would be a great thing to do. And she finds, she searches the net, for him, and she finds someone who has, somehow found out about their relationship. I mean, I don't know how this is done, but, she finds someone else. And she invites this other woman to act as a surrogate sexual partner for her. So for Samantha, so that basically her and Theo can kind of actually have sex. But I mean, obviously, it's not actually it's not actually her. But what she does is she gets this surrogate to come over, and she puts the microphone on her face. And so, whenever this stranger is speaking, it sounds like Samantha speaking. And so it's basically like, it's kind of a crude way of Samantha giving herself a physical avatar, so that she can, although she's not feeling the feelings of this individual, at least there's some kind of physicality there, and I think she's trying to compensate for that in some way. And what I found very interesting about that is I think that really does say a lot about the immense confusion that technology and all the societal and cultural changes that we've gone through and are going through have changed people, and have made people very, very confused and somewhat dysfunctional in terms of their emotions and their relationships. I mean, because the whole premise in this scenario is that this person who was basically volunteered to be a sexual surrogate, wasn't interested in having like their own relationship.
Yes.
They weren't really interested in kind of getting their own. This girl obviously wasn't interested in getting her own boyfriend and just having a relationship with her. She wanted to have basically kind of a three-way relationship with a computer and another guy, and she was desperate. Like she was really desperate to be part of this relationship, and she saw the intimacy between them. She saw the connection between them. She saw how close they were, and I think that really says a lot. I mean, the fact that someone would actually, rather than try and explore opportunities and options and possibilities for engaging in a real human relationship with another human being, someone has actually saw more appeal and more humanity and more genuine, warm human intimacy in a relationship between a man and his computer, to the point where she would rather engage in that as a third party.
Well, she's just she's just, again, a third party or mediator or something. She's willingly putting herself a vessel. She's a human automaton.
A human automaton, like a vessel, and she'd rather do that. She sees for whatever reason, and we could go into the psychodynamics of this for hours, but for whatever reason, she feels more motivated and feels more attracted toward that situation than she would toward normal, just having a boyfriend. I think that speaks volumes about what the film's about.
It's pointing out very real neuroses that do pop up in our modern day. I mean, you can look at that and say that's really weird, but the reality of it is lots of similar stuff is actually going on now. We're just not talking about. We're not paying attention to it as close as we had ought to be. I mean, there's the topic of. Well, there's these things called real dolls, which are sex dolls that are super lifelike for men to have. So it's kind of like this: can we create this perfect machine to be this lifeless sex partner? But we're not thinking in terms of, well, what if the human being itself starts turning themselves into a machine that is vacuous of all emotion and all thought, like that they willingly become that. It's not that we're creating it, but we're becoming it as a consequence of what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen these themes played out in science fiction for quite a long time now through various, films and TV series like Star Trek. There's quite a lot of this in Star Trek with the holodecks and everything. Yeah, a few other bits and pieces down through the history of sci-fi, but not to the level of this film. Where you've actually got a real human being who has not been bred or created to fulfill this role, but has actually made a conscious choice to go and fulfill this role and be this mediator or this vessel or this surrogate or whatever you want to call it. By choice, because they actually see more appeal, they see more humanity, I think.
Or something.
Or something.
Who knows what the motivation would be? But I could see this happening. Like, it was totally believable to me.
It was totally believable. And I could see, like you just said, I could totally see this happening. And although I've not seen that particular situation in my own life, I've seen similar kinds of situations, just with people or you might overhear a conversation, or you might have an experience that has some kind of similar kind of subtext or undertones to it, and so it is totally believable, and one of the most interesting and striking points in the film is basically where the surrogate arrives, and she's got Samantha's voice, there's a little microphone pinned to her lip,
That's right.
She starts coming on to Theo, and they start sort of, she does a kind of a lap dance for him, and they start sort of engaging in seduction and foreplay and all the rest of it. And, Samantha's really, really into it. And this surrogate sort of third party who's basically a stranger to Theo, a complete stranger, is really, really getting into it. And then, we reach a point where Theo's like, well, he stops himself. He's like, this is wrong. This is not you. I'm in love with you. I'm not in love with this person, this stranger standing in front of me. This is just weird and wrong, basically. Yeah. And he stops it and says, like, okay, I can't continue. And this poor girl, this surrogate girl who's been, hired, or I think it was voluntary actually, who's come along to partake in this kind of weird digital freeway. She gets really, really upset. She gets very, very hurt. I mean, she runs away and slams the door and hides in the bathroom, and she's bawling her eyes out.
It's because she wanted to do it. She's trying to fulfill something that she didn't have before. She really wanted to do it, and this was the way that she wanted to fulfill whatever it was that she wanted to do.
Some awful gap inside of her, for whatever reasons they may be, whether it's to do with parents or previous boyfriends or whatever, or it's just, could be any number of reasons, but it's that powerful.
It's funny, we're psychoanalyzing these fictional characters, but I mean that's what you do with a good film. Like, it portrays very real human psychology, things that are just present in the real world.
That's kind of what this film is in so many ways. We are psychoanalyzing fictional characters, but each of these fictional characters represents a very, very predominant archetype within society. And every one of them is representing a piece of ourselves. Mm-hmm. We can all see a little piece of ourselves in each of these characters, some more so than others, depending on who you are. But at the same time, that they also speak to, what you might call personality types and certain demographics and certain repetitive concepts and repetitive problems that keep coming up in society. So although, as you say, we're just kind of psychoanalyzing, fictional characters, we're not really. We're talking about things that are really happening around us. We're talking about the human condition as it is today and where it might be going in the future. Due to technology, although, as we said before, technology is kind of just a catalyst for all these things. It's not really the main focus, and that's one of the things you see in the aesthetics of the film as well. And that's just another point I wanted to bring up, actually. One of the big differences here in this film compared to a lot of other sci-fi films that deal with similar concepts is that the technology and the advancement of the technology, the appeal and the aesthetics of the technology, the flashiness of it, all the CGI, is often the primacy of the film in terms of the aesthetics. Where in this film, it's not. Things look fairly normal. They don't look that futuristic. They almost have a kind of a 70s retro feel to them. There's not a lot of bright colors, there's a lot of beige, a lot of brown. A kind of a minimal look to things, and so the focus is not so much on a flashy technological super duper Everything's neon, everything's shiny, kind of whatever you want to call it. Like most sci-fi films,
like Tron, not, glowing like Tron.
Yeah. It's like, it's not like that. It's the opposite of that. It almost looks like today, or it looks like maybe a 70s sci-fi film, perhaps. In terms of the decor and the aesthetics, and I think that was done again to perhaps take a little bit less attention away from the actual technology itself, and maybe draw more attention towards the emotional dynamics of the film as being more, perhaps more predominant and more worthy of scrutiny and thought and philosophical kind of contemplation than just the technology itself.
Yeah, and so much of. Their wardrobe is set up, or Theodore's is, he's got a pocket that he fits his cellular phone in. It just looks like somebody, doing something with their iPhone. And again, we're talking about today. We're not talking about the future. We're just talking about the stuff that people do now. They do that sort of stuff.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The technology that they're using in these films. The computers just look like an iMac. The phones just like a Nokia, or an iPhone or something. They don't look particularly advanced. Obviously, in the operating system and the processing power and the fact that they've got artificial intelligence in them is a big difference. But in terms of, their role in society, it's not that different from today. And in terms of the aesthetics, it almost looks a little bit more retro and a little bit older than some of the technology we have around today. And of course, the way that technology is presented in some of the other sci-fi and futuristic type films.
It's, again, with a lot of interesting occult stuff, it goes back into the past, like, the Atlantean stories, like, well, in the past there was great technology, but it was lost. It's just an interesting way to think of things, to change the sequence of things, to just look at things a different way. And instead of, we say, oh, well, future goes that way, past goes that way. It's just an interesting kind of device to wrap your head around things in a different kind of way, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I think that would probably sum it up quite well. It's the way that the technology and the general aesthetics and vibe of the society in this fictional scenario, I think, do lend themselves towards looking at technology and at the whole premise in a completely different way than we're used to, compared to some of the other films that deal with any kind of future scenario or sci-fi type scenario. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, are there any other details that you had that you wanted to talk about, Adam?
So yeah, just in terms of some of the sort of little symbolic things that we've picked up on throughout the film. Again, some little bits and pieces, and you mentioned the fact that when they were on the boat trip, and the boat was called Spirit, which was probably not done arbitrarily, and. In terms of a film that has this much emotional depth and significance, I often look at the names in the films and look at the etymology of names, and to see if the names might, have some kind of meaning or might be alluding to something in some way. And I picked up on the etymology of the two sort of main, well, I guess they're, co-protagonists or whatever. You've got Samantha, the AGI, who's kind of in some ways the star of the film. And, if you look back to the etymology of her name, in, I think, Aramaic or Hebrew, that period of time anyway, Samantha means listener. It means listener, or listener of God. Either or, I think it was interchangeable. Basically, the emphasis being on listening, a listener. And I found that very interesting because the relationship starts out kind of almost like a therapeutic relationship. Although they do become intimately involved, in the beginning, she's kind of like his kind of secretary / counselor. She's kind of listening to all of his problems and coming up with solutions and catering to his emotional needs and making him feel better and comforting him. So she does sort of take on, the typical role of listener, which is kind of like a counselor therapist type role, at least, historically and traditionally. The listener would always be like the doctor or the shaman or the today it's the therapist or the psychologist or whatever, So I thought that was very interesting that they chose the name listener. And then you've got Theo or Theodore, that I think the etymology of that one goes back to Greco-Roman times, and I think that was from memory. I think the original Theo was Theodorus, and Theodorus meant gift of God. So that's quite an interesting little tie-in there. The fact that you've got the main two characters, if you've a listener of God and gift of God, Do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe it ties back to the male and female archetypes again, and that, they're two sides of one God in the occult tradition, because in the occult tradition, it's a single androgynous God, and even beyond that, there's something beyond that that's really like neither and everything all at once, the absolute, all that sort of stuff. So, in the higher realms within the occult, you're talking about conjoining things, and it's all about like the mystery of God and what is that, and here in the material realm we're just seeing different tiny little fragments of whatever that greater mystery happens to be. All right, so it looks like we're hitting the end of this hour here. So are there any other thoughts that you had on the film, Adam, or any other points that you want to make?
I guess not any other thoughts. I mean, there's probably 1,000 I'll think of tomorrow, and I'll once again kick myself for not mentioning them at the time. But I think again, I just wanted to emphasize the main predominant themes that really stood out to me in this film, and that, I mean, it's like, for me, I think everything in this film, it illustrates the growing dependence on technology that we are seeing in the world, in society, and how that's affecting us, and how. How this growing dependence on technology is acting, more and more as a surrogate for real human contact, that being for so many different reasons, people's fear of being hurt, the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of engaging with people on a real emotional level, of expressing themselves, which of course is brought out so strongly in the Theo character. And so it's everything from the Theo character to the work that he does. For example, I mean, working at the letter writing company, where he's actually, a professional love letter writer. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've got a society where, people have become so dependent on a digital third party or a digital mediator to express their feelings. That's a booming business in this particular scenario. People will pay somebody else to write the person they love a love letter because they themselves are actually unable to express those feelings. So so many different aspects of this film. So many of the different characters and the plot devices and scenarios all tie back to this same theme of the sort of growing disconnect and the dysfunctionality that we're seeing in human relationships, and how technology is starting to surrogate for that and starting to fill in those gaps and give people some sort of surrogate sense of humanity and of warmth and of intimacy and all those things that we naturally crave for, And I mean, there's so many other examples I can put my finger on right now, but it's almost everything in the film it seems to me to try and drive home that point in a way. And again, as I said, at the beginning and throughout this interview, I think that, and as Spike Jonze himself said, that it's not so much about the technology itself. It's more that what this technology represents to us. What this technology has become for us or might become for us. And what that says about us. I think more than anything else. So I think this film really is more about human relationships, human dynamics, the effect that technology and the general changes in culture and society that we've been through, so rapidly over the last few decades, have changed us to the point where, we're almost in love with our own technology. And I think that is another allegory for the film, where even though the technology that Theodore falls in love with is, supposedly intelligent and sentient and supposedly does have real feelings, in the same way that the human being might have feelings, she's still a piece of technology. And I think, if you watch the film, in many ways what you're seeing is man's idolization of technology, man falling in love with his own creation in a way. I think that's definitely another angle to this film.
Yeah, I do like that old theme where man creates something, he falls in love with the creation. That's always a good one. And I think we would all do well to look at this film and the issues it raises with our relationships with technology and what we're actually using technology for, and look at our own faults and where we're using technology as a crutch, because we all do it to an extent. I think it would be best if we're all aware of it. And I know that even just now myself, I was kind of thinking about some ways in which I do these things myself. So I know that I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to self-analyze myself and make sure that I don't I don't fall into any bad habits, or if I do, I rein them in control, and I always understand where I am in my own head. You know what I mean? So if people aren't doing these sorts of things that are just they're necessary elements of being a human being, because it's a difficult business being a human. It's not easy to do. It's hard.
No,
and that's dealing. It's hard dealing with yourself, let alone dealing with other people.
I know, and that's what this film is really about. It's the people's inability to deal with their own emotions being reflected in their inability to deal with other people's emotions. Really, that's really the central theme that keeps coming up throughout, again and again, through all the interactions in this film. That not only the main protagonist has, but all the sort of supporting characters have. Their inability to really look at themselves and who they are and what their flaws are and why they are the way they are, and what their issues are and all the rest of it, and how that inability to be honest with themselves plays out in the real world in their own relationships and their own experiences. How one is a reflection of the other. And we live in a world where people are becoming less and less prone toward self-reflection and introspection and being honest with oneself, and instead using technology to simply fill the emotional gap within them rather than look at whether that emotional gap came from in the first place. So I think that's a very interesting thing. And as you say, we would encourage people to view the film in that lens, to view the film in terms of an exploration of those themes and how it might affect them personally. Even it's like you said, even for me myself, I've been through very, very similar experiences where, that are strikingly similar to the experience that Theodore went through. Where I've developed very intense, intimate emotional connections with women. Where there's been very little physical contact, where it's mostly being conducted online or through text messages or something like that, and how easy it is to get drawn into that, and how easy it is to idealize someone and to kind of stay in that safe zone of not actually having any physical interaction with the person, because it's emotionally safer and less risky to keep them at arm's length through the pole barge of technology. You know what I mean? People, and I think this film is about that in so many ways, and so I could really relate to a lot of those themes. I've been through so many at least a few experiences where that again bear a striking resemblance to this, where it's very, very easy to develop a sort of a quite an intense emotional connection with someone when there isn't really a lot of physical interaction there. It's mostly done through this digital medium, and for that reason, it presents a whole bunch of problems, because and this of course was dealt with in the film, during the winter of the relationship, where they are forced to acknowledge, the fact that they are different, and the fact that the relationship is not really sustainable because of their fundamental differences. And it's something that I've had to contend with myself in my own life, and so I guess I could only encourage people to watch this film and think about it in those terms, and use this film as a way to look at themselves and their own relationships and how technology might be affecting their own emotional dynamics and how they go through life and how they view themselves and their previous relationships and their desires and their identity and everything, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to add one other esoteric note to bring it back on that. With alchemy. Alchemy is, again, the art of multiplication, they call it. So this will give me a nice chance to disparage transhumanists, as I like to do too. So I would say that there's dark alchemists in the world, and that their method would be to use technology as a crutch and get us wanting that.
Which is quite obviously happening. Yeah.
So anyway, alchemy as the art of multiplication. If you're using alchemy for good, you're multiplying the powerful and good aspects in yourself to self-empower yourself. Now, if people are being damaged in whatever way, if they're suffering from all sorts of neuroses, then those neuroses can be multiplied too, can't they? When you get one person who's neurotic and another person who's neurotic, when they come together, as we're saying, you bring two people together who are broken, well, then that multiplies. That's a multiplying factor. So, and using technology is kind of like this intermediary where we're using it as a crutch, and also like some folks are giving it as this grand answer when it's not really the answer. The answer is ourselves. What are we multiplying? Are we multiplying our neurosis and being more dependent, or are we being independent and multiplying all the good in us?
Well, I think, I think for the most part, unfortunately, it's the former. The case would be, I think for the most part, what we're looking at here and what the film is illustrating is, basically a growing sense of dependency on technology to fill an emotional gap, instead of looking at, as I said before, the reasons for what that emotional, the reasons for why that emotional gap might be there, and for how that emotional gap can be nurtured and filled in a human, organic way, through a legitimate introspective alchemical process where all the different facets of the personality and all the different archetypes within us, the masculine and the feminine, can be integrated into a balanced, harmonious form of some sort. That would obviously be the ideal sort of form of alchemy if there was to be one, and that is kind of presented and to a degree in this film, and as we discussed before, that there is an alchemical process to a degree within the Theodore character, where he does begin to sort of integrate, the various archetypes within himself, into a more balanced human being that's capable, I think, more so than at the beginning, of engaging with people in a very real way. But compare that to the real world, and we've got quite the opposite going on, and this is very prevalent towards the beginning of the film, where we're seeing this total escapism, where people aren't looking at themselves. They're not looking at, genuine, authentic ways of engaging with other people, and of self-development, and of learning to look at themselves, and learning to nurture human, organic, fulfilling relationships, but rather escaping into technology and escaping into idealism, escaping into fantasy, and I think sadly that's the case, and I think for the most part, I'm talking in generalities here. Of course, there are always exceptions, but yeah, of course. Yeah. But I think as a general rule, for the most part, I think it's generally about escapism, and again, at the beginning of the film, that was more what it was about. But of course, we had this, this alchemical change sort of facilitated through this kind of goddess, for lack of a better word, in esoteric terminology, at least, so again, it was very refreshing to see it portrayed in that way, rather than the direction that things are sort of going in now, where it's just literal escapism from the real. It's escape. People are wanting to escape themselves. People are wanting to escape their own emotions, and they're looking towards technology as the the vessel through which to make that escape. They're looking at it as the solution to escape themselves.
It's no real solution at all. No.
There's no solution at all. No. I mean, it just brings about more confusion and more dysfunctionality and more emotional decay in the long run. And so this again, as we said before, this film is a very refreshing change from most of the sci-fi and futuristic films out there that deal with these types of concepts.
Yeah. So if all of you out there haven't seen the film, we would both obviously recommend that you watch it. It won the Academy Award for Best Screenplay, I believe, this year, or for 2013. So, take that for what it's worth. And we want to thank you for listening to Themes and Memes. I mean, we're going to be continuing producing this podcast once a month. It'll be on my Transresistor radio feed at ageoftransitions.com. I'm Aaron Franz. Adam, anything else you want to say? Just heading out?
Yeah, sure. It will also be on my website shortly because I do actually have plans to get that up and running fairly soon. I mean, I've kind of, as I said before, I left it sort of on the back burner for a while just because I was so busy. But I mean, it is going to get built fairly soon. I've got someone coming to help me with that. And I'll be uploading the content to that soon as well. But in the meantime, the Transresistor radio feed will be the source of all the themes and memes, at least until I get my website, in a functioning state. But it's been a very enjoyable conversation, Aaron. I enjoyed this, and I think this is definitely one of the best reviews we've done in terms of, all the different concepts we've talked about. And I think primarily it's because it's the best film I think we've reviewed. It's a really, really good film, and I would really encourage people to think about what we've said in these interviews or discussions rather, and to watch the film, perhaps thinking about some of the things that we've talked about, and maybe people will discover further depth and further meaning, and there's no doubt a lot of that there which we haven't covered because there's only so much you can cover in 2 hours. So go out and watch.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun as always, Adam.
Yeah, I look forward to our next installment, and I hope the audiences enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you all next time. Hello, you are listening to Themes and Memes, a different kind of movie review. My name is Adam from CerebralRevolt.com, and here with me is my co-host Aaron from TheAgeOfTransitions.com. How are you doing today, Aaron?
Very good. It's great to talk to you again, Adam. I'm looking forward to another great movie discussion. What movie is it that we're going to be talking about today?
We will be reviewing the film Her by Spike Jonze, the director Spike Jonze. A very, very interesting film, and something which we both have a lot to say on. So this is a very good film too, I think I might add.
It's an excellent film, and we actually already had a bit to say about it, didn't we? What happened
We did. There was a bit of a slip up. We have actually already recorded an hour, and we got a pretty good hour down, and then the file was lost, shall we say? Yeah. Without wanting to place blame.
We certainly could place blame, and I would be willing to take the blame here, but let's not go there. We're starting fresh. Here it is, the next episode of Themes and Memes here.
Yeah. So reviewing this film, Spike Jonze's Her, which is a very, very interesting film, in which I have a lot to say about, and I think you'd probably, in the same boat there. So many varied and interesting themes in this film, relating to so many different aspects of our lives and things that people can relate to. And I think despite this film being so good and being so enjoyable, and my opinion of it being so high, this is going to be one of the more difficult interviews I think we would have done on this. I think it's going to be a good discussion, I think that people will hopefully get a lot out of it, but it's going to be difficult for me, at least, because I have so much to say on this film in so many different areas, and so it's going to be hard to structure the interview in any way,
Yeah. Well, this is an excellent film, as we're both agreeing. It's a well done film. It's by far the best film that we've reviewed on Themes and Memes yet. That's without a doubt.
No.
A lot of times, for sure. And I mean, it deals with so many different subjects. I mean, we even trying to pin down like a main theme is difficult here. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if you were going to summarize the film in terms of what its main theme was, it was, it's about how technology is changing human emotions and human relationships, and and society and the human psyche as a whole, for those reasons. And this is done whatever, and just leads a very, very sort of lonely life, and it's a life which I think a lot of people out there could relate to. Being emotionally disconnected from the people around you, having gone through some kind of emotional pain due to the breakup of a relationship, and just living, a life of where technology has starting to sort of become the surrogate for real human interactions. And what he does is, he goes and buys this OS. This is called OS 1. That's the name of the product. And OS 1 is not just an operating system that you install, but it's actually an artificial general intelligence, which takes a bit of your personal information. It interviews you, it asks you a few kind of basic questions about your childhood and your relationship with your mother and stuff like that, and automatically within a few moments creates an artificial intelligence that is catered to your personality and essentially becomes like a part of your life, a friend. And the story really starts, I think, from that moment onwards, and the relationship that develops between him and this artificial intelligence that lives, both in his computer and also in his mobile phone.
Yeah, the film is definitely playing to the very real alienation that we all experience to one extent or another in modern day, because the modern world does tend to alienate us, put us on our own little islands of existence here, where our communication with the rest of the world has become more and more through the computer. So we all kind of congregate in this electronic arena. So the film is playing to that very real phenomenon, and it's, again, adding the artificial intelligence theme into the equation. A kind of like, well, what if situation.
Well, I mean, it's taking scenarios that already exist. It's taking social changes, social problems. As you said, the decaying levels of genuine emotional interaction between individuals, and how technology is becoming a kind of a vessel or a catalyst or a surrogate for real, genuine emotional interaction, and it's basically placing AI at the center of that and saying, well, what if this happened? How much farther could we take it? How much more dependent would we become on technology? And what are the philosophical and sociological sort of problems or issues or questions that would arise in a situation like that? So, I mean, the film is playing on themes that already exist, in today's world, and just sort of taking them through a story where a man basically develops a relationship with an artificial intelligence. Something that we've not really seen a lot of in films regarding artificial intelligence. And in terms of films that are about AI, and in this case AGI, an artificial general intelligence, we haven't seen any other films, or at least I can't think of any that deal with the subject matter in the way that this film has. So it's very, very different from most films that deal with artificial intelligence. Usually it's usually quite a dark, pessimistic, view of, like The Matrix, for example, where the machines take over, or Terminator with Skynet, some sort of post-apocalyptic sci-fi future where basically life is hell because the artificial intelligence has taken over. But this is something totally different. This is almost the opposite in a lot of ways.
It's a new look at the artificial general intelligence theme, and a refreshing one. I'm glad to see some sort of different take on this, because we need it, because people were starting to get an idea of what of what artificial intelligence would be. I mean, from the movies, we get the Terminator scenario, and then no room for real other versions of how artificial intelligence will come about. And I think that this is a pretty interesting portrayal, in that it shows artificial general intelligence as an emergent property of sort of social networking and personal computers in general as we know them right now. So from out of our current interactions with technology, you throw in the artificial general intelligence, it kind of comes up, and even in the film, it's introduced in such a way as it's kind of it's not billed as this huge thing that's coming up. It's just kind of like the next latest and greatest product, and it's just simply another product, really.
Yeah, that's right. And as again, if we refer back to most other films which deal with the same subject matter, usually it's like a revolutionary sequence of events, or a revolutionary act, or some kind of world-changing scenario where artificial intelligence is born and immediately, changes the world overnight. Usually usually in a very destructive way. And this is something very, very different. And where, as you say, the artificial intelligence is basically like just the latest product. It's the latest. It's like the equivalent to the latest MacBook or the latest iPhone or whatever. It's just it's an operating system that you can buy, but which supposedly has a consciousness and can interact with you as a real person would. And so the story follows. I'll give a bit of a summary here. For people who haven't seen the film, or even for people who have, basically what we've got. The film starts out with an emotionally wounded guy, shall we say, who's just come out of a fairly messy and painful divorce. He's going through a divorce. He's separated from his partner, and he works at a technology company, which it's quite a strange job he has, actually. This is just on a side note here, but it ties into a lot of the other things we're talking about. He works for a company which writes love letters for people who are, for some reason or another, unable to write them themselves or to engage directly with their loved ones. They actually hire a company to write handwritten love letters where, the company will think about, all the, take a bit of personal data from you and basically come up with something really sort of loving and meaningful and genuine and honest and deep, and write it in the form of a love letter, which is then printed off to make it look handwritten and given to the client. So we can talk about the ins and outs of that concept and what that says about human interaction and human relationships later on, but that is the job that this particular protagonist has in the film. He works for a company verbally writing love letters through voice recognition software. So he sits there all day just sort of basically quoting poetry, and having it converted into a product for people. But he works for a technology firm, and he sort of comes home at the end of a day, and he plays video games. He's got this this is in the future, obviously. We're talking maybe 10, 15 years in the future. It's not specified in the film exactly, but he plays this sort of 3D holographic type video game, and he engages in this kind of phone sex type thing. When he's feeling lonely, or to the next level in terms of what if, as you said.
Yeah, and it is definitely honest about the human condition, because we're plagued with all sorts of issues. We're so prone to neurosis. The human psyche is so fragile. The human body is so fragile too. And these realities of human existence are what transhumanists latch onto and say, look, we're incredibly weak, therefore let us change. Well, the transhumanist thing is a whole problem in and of itself. But it is true. We have to all realize that we're prone to weakness, and this film kind of shows us different aspects of that. And you're mentioning he has these sort of online sex chat with another person, and it ends up really going haywire with this other person he ends up talking to is like got some real issues. And
yeah.
You know what I mean?
To say the least, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This is kind of towards the beginning of the film, and I think in a lot of ways this particular event it almost sets in motion the kind of the sequence of events, or motivates him in some way to maybe look into buying this artificial intelligence, because he's so lonely, and because he's relying on these phone sex chat lines for his to satisfy his appetites, and to make him feel a bit less lonely or whatever. I think I think that may have played a part in his decision to actually go and upgrade and get this new OS, this artificial intelligence. And it's basically a scenario where he's again he comes home from a day of work, and he's kind of getting sick of playing this video game, and he's sort of feeling lonely and a bit tearful at night, and so he logs into this phone sex thing, and he ends up sort of chatting with somebody and having phone sex with them, and this towards the climax of the experience, she starts screaming and demanding that he strangle her with a dead cat, and so that was obviously a very shocking moment in the script there, and and a shocking moment for him, and a real turnoff, obviously, the sort of really weird kink to the whole thing, and so I think that particular scene, or that particular experience, at least for the protagonist, may have served as some kind of motivation for him to go and look for something a bit more deeper and a bit more meaningful, which he does actually find through the artificial intelligence. Funnily enough,
oddly enough, he is the everyman in search of the genuine. That's what this is.
Exactly, the everyman in the search